Okay, I'm very excited to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show Professor Wade Pfau, who is a professor of retirement income at the American College. It's interesting to me, Wade, to talk to somebody who's a professor of retirement income because it's something I deal with all the time on sort of a practical level, but it sounds like you deal with it on a much more theoretical level. But I'd like to dive into a real practical question that comes up all the time, which is a lot of times people, they get older and they own their home and they're told, why don't you take a reverse mortgage on your home to pay your expenses for the rest of your life? Are they getting good advice?
Thanks, Doug. Yeah, reverse mortgages, it's something that there's definitely a very negative perception about them, but a lot has changed in terms of the rules surrounding the program to correct some of those issues, and it's really evolved with the financial planning research to become part of the toolbox for a responsible retiree. I mean, the old perception about reverse mortgages was that you use them as a last resort when all else has failed, but now it's open a line of credit on a reverse mortgage early in retirement, allow that line of credit to actually grow over time, and then use it strategically throughout retirement as part of an overall plan. And yeah, absolutely, they can actually improve retirement outcomes. They help to manage.
Let me stop you there. Explain that once more. When you say open a line of credit, that sounds to me like you're putting up your house as collateral and they're just going to give you a checkbook against it.
Right. It's like a traditional home equity line of credit, although there's a number of important differences within the context of a reverse mortgage line of credit. The one important one, well, several important things, one being just that it will grow throughout retirement. But right, it provides a way to create liquidity for the home so that you can tap into the reverse mortgage as you need to throughout retirement. You don't necessarily have to take everything out right away. And in fact, the rules of the program now discourage you from taking everything out right away. But
I see. I just want to clarify. So it used to be, let's say a person owned a $500,000 home. He would take a reverse mortgage and then they might give him on day number one $200,000. And from that moment on, he's paying interest on that loan forever. And you're saying that it works differently. Now you might just take out $3,000 on day number one to pay some bills, but that's the extent of your reverse mortgage?
Right. There's been a big change. There are still these fixed rate reverse mortgages where you do take everything out at the beginning, but they're hardly ever used anymore. It's now the variable rate reverse mortgages where you can take out some at the beginning, but right, it's mostly in terms of setting up this line of credit that you can draw from throughout retirement, not taking everything out all at once.
When you say variable rate, what would happen if interest rates were to move up?
Then the rate would increase. This is actually interesting because it's pretty much the only retirement income tool that benefits from low interest rates if your goal is to use the line of credit slowly rather than quickly. You get to borrow more initially when interest rates are low. And then if interest rates go up over time, if you're keeping it mostly as a line of credit, it's going to be the line of credit that grows more quickly over time.
Can you lock in the low rate once you borrow the money, or is it going to go up? Is the interest on the amount that you owe going to increase if interest rates rise?
Well, yeah, for the loan balance part, the interest rate would increase as interest rates rise. For these variable rate versions that you use to create a line of credit, you really want that interest rate to increase potentially. But if you are thinking mainly to perhaps pay off an existing mortgage, you may want a fixed rate and you may take everything out at the beginning. There are still the fixed rate options out there. They're just not really the commonly discussed versions anymore because they don't have a line of credit associated with them.
When you borrow money against your house, like a reverse mortgage, isn't that actually making the concept of compound interest work against you rather than for you?
Well, there are several things to think about. So, I mean, yes, if there's a loan balance in there, that loan balance is growing at a variable rate, and if rates go up, that rate is increasing. But one of the research about reverse mortgages has mostly focused on using them in a coordinated fashion to help manage sequence of returns risk in retirement. And this is one of the new risks in retirement, where if your portfolio is down in value and you're trying to fund your spending from a portfolio that's down, you have to sell a higher percentage of what's left to meet your spending goal. And that creates a tough hurdle for your portfolio to overcome. So in terms of the research about the reverse mortgage, it's important to include realistic costs, both for setting them up and for that growth of the loan balance over time. But when you look at the end of retirement, how much is left in the investment portfolio, plus how much is the house worth, minus what's the loan balance, if that overall number is bigger, then you're in a better position than otherwise. And the research I've done, as well as a lot of others, points to the idea that you do have a loan balance. It does have a variable interest rate, but you're still going to be better off overall when you use the reverse mortgage in a strategic way throughout retirement.
Mm-hmm. And it's also a way to give cash flow at a time when you don't necessarily have other means of cash flow. We're talking with Professor Wade Pfau, who is a professor of retirement income. He also hosts the Retirement Researcher website. I want to go into other strategies, Wade, that you talk about. You've mentioned the sequence of returns risk. There's another idea that people talk about, which is a time segmentation strategy. Can you explain how that can be used to benefit retirees?
Mm-hmm. So the time segmentation strategies, they're also sometimes called bucket strategies, but the basic underlying idea is you invest differently for different time horizons. And in particular, you tend to hold bonds to cover the near-term expenses because they're less vulnerable to market downturns. I mean, managing this sequence of returns risk, it's really about trying to find ways to avoid selling assets at a loss. And so if you have bonds covering your first, say, 5 to 10 years of retirement expenses, if there is a downturn in the stock market, you still have time to overcome that because you just leave your stocks alone and hope. There's a degree of hope here, but hope that they recover before your bonds have run out and before it's absolutely essential that you start tapping into the stocks again.
You know, the problem that I find in my day job, I'm a financial advisor, so I really do work with retirees, and we're really, we've got our eyes always peeled to find some way to make more income. And you're mentioning bonds as part of the bucket, which is something we talk about all the time. But it inevitably comes back to the fact that interest rates today are, we could just call them anemic, but they're just so low. People who, remember days when rates were, let's say 5%, let alone 10 or 15%. And, we're telling them, listen, you can buy a bond and make 2 or 3%. It drives them crazy. And I understand that. What should retirees do with their safe money given such a low interest rate environment?
Right. That's
low interest rate environment.
Holistically about all the available assets. And so bond yields are low. That's going to depress returns on bonds and stocks. For something like an income annuity that pays an income for life, that's going to lead to lower payout rates. But contrary to the popular wisdom, an income annuity becomes more attractive, relatively speaking, when interest rates are low because they also include, it's called mortality credits. It's the idea of, since you're receiving a guaranteed income for life and that risk is pooled through a large number of people, those who don't live as long subsidize those who live longer, and that component's not impacted by interest rates. So the cost of building a retirement income with bonds and stocks increases at a faster rate when interest rates are low relative to something like an income annuity. Or that's another case where a reverse mortgage can fit in because when interest rates are low, you get a higher initial borrowing amount and you can just use that in a coordinated fashion. Low interest rates also increase that exposure to the sequence of returns risk because your portfolio's not generating enough interest and dividends to fund your lifestyle. So you are in a position where you're tapping into that principal. That makes you more vulnerable to selling assets at a loss. So it's thinking beyond just the investment portfolio really is a starting point.
No, I think I like your model of thinking holistically. That is important. I also think that one of the fears that people have is not always warranted, which is, oh my gosh, I can't touch my principal. Depending on how much principal you have, if you do it in a scheduled way, for example, if you buy bonds, premium bonds, and over time, the sum of your principal will get eaten up because you're going to spend it. But as long as depending how old you are, you understand how and when, that's a way of increasing cash flow without just, selling off your stock portfolio and taking money today. It's done in a way that you can actually get consistent income, which I think is important for people rather than getting chunks of income at a time when they may not know what to do with the money.
Yeah, that's right. Most of the research shows that you really want to invest for a total return where you're willing to also spend some of your principal as well versus trying to invest to generate income. That just investing for income can be a riskier overall strategy. And though you may get a higher percentage from the income portion, your capital gains may be less, and so you're not really in a better overall position with that sort of strategy.
Yeah, great point. Hey, Wade, this has been really great. You've covered a lot of very interesting information. I think that ideas that people don't always think about, and it certainly opened up the ideas that they should think about it more. I know that there's a lot of ways that people can follow you and follow your work. Just tell us, what's the best way to keep tabs on what's going on in your world?
Well, thanks, Doug. And you mentioned earlier, my website is retirementresearcher.com. It's all one long word, retirement researcher. Or if you Google my name, I'm the only one with this name, which is pretty lucky in our new internet age.
All right, very special. We will put links to your website and, of course, your name at the show notes of today's show at goldsteinongelt.com. Professor Wade Pfau, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Check out all of Doug's money ideas at goldsteinongelt.com. Doug specializes in helping people who live outside the United States handle their U.S. investment accounts. If you have a question that you would like answered on the air or off, contact Doug at his website or send him an email to doug@profile-financial.com.